The following video is really long. I'm very sorry. I want to tell you a story of heartbreak and betrayal, of love ground into the dirt and spat upon until all that was left was a shallow husk of what once was beautiful. But before that, imagine this. It's your first day of high school, and goodness, you're excited. New friends to make, new things to learn, a whole new self to discover. Gosh, but you can hardly contain yourself. You meet up with your best friend, and she can almost match your excitement, pulling you along to the school's opening ceremony where her sister's band is about to put on a little show. You're excited because she's excited, but then the singer opens her mouth and her voice, the most incredible sound you've ever heard, sweeps you away. All of a sudden, you've got eyes only for her. It doesn't take you long to realize you've fallen in love at first sight. So opens Whisper Me a Love Song, one of my favorite manga ever. Just from that description, it might seem like a simple, straightforward love story. Himari, the young woman on her first day of high school, is forthcoming with her aunt Yuri, the singer, and her innocent confession absolutely steals Yuri's heart. But where Himari uses the word love in a general sense, Yuri's love is very much romantic, and the first 3 volumes track their relationship as Yuri commits to wooing her crush. So, yes, that does seem straightforward, but a closer reading of those opening chapters reveals a greater thematic depth, a surprisingly solid foundation upon which the rest of the series builds. One of the most striking things about the early volumes is just how honest Himari and Yuri are about their feelings. After getting blindsided by Yuri's confession at the end of Volume 1, the first thing Himari does at the start of Volume 2 is confer with her best friend Miki about how confused she's feeling, and she comes out of that conversation beaming, determined to sort out her feelings. Similar. Why would anyone ever deliberately write that word to have to say it out loud? That word sucks. I only have myself to blame. Similarly, nailed it. Toward the end of that same volume, when Yuri sees another girl doting on Himari, she immediately feels a pang of jealousy, but instead of letting those feelings fester, she confides in her best friend Aki, and comes out of the conversation cheered up. And this is a pattern that repeats throughout the early volumes, characters feeling bad feelings and immediately opening up about and working through them. And you may be wondering, well, what the heck? Where's the story then? Characters just being honest with each other? But that's not how drama is made. Characters are supposed to keep secrets and come into conflict with opposing ideals or feelings. You know, kind of like...
Why wouldn't you just tell us the truth? And it's so much easier than lying.
Without that tension, where's the juice? Oh, just you wait. Because it turns out those first 3 volumes are actually about laying the thematic foundation for the rest of the narrative. It's all about honesty, about being forthcoming with your hard feelings to your family and friends so as to work through them. That theme is at first illustrated through Himari and Yuri's relatively painless process of hooking up over the first 3 volumes, but then, throughout the next 6 volumes, that theme is re-examined and reinforced through 2 primary avenues. One, the series' primary relationship, that of Himari and Yuri, is tested when brushes with dishonesty on the parts of both of them start to eat away at them. 2, the couple are caught in the crossfire of a conflict whose primary antagonist lives by a philosophy diametrically opposed to that core theme, a young woman whose life is built on keeping it all bottled in. Let's hit those points one at a time. Throughout the series, Himari is only truly dishonest once, when she commits her one and only great act of deception in Chapter 26, end of Volume 5, and it immediately blows up in her face, triggering a shouting match between her friends that just tears her heart apart. It's thematically appropriate, a fundamentally honest character in a story about honesty being punished for dishonesty. In a story that touts the virtue of honesty, it only makes sense to portray deception in a negative light, to show it sprouting seeds of discord where a more truthful approach might have avoided the mess. But this event also has ramifications that reverberate for the next 4 volumes, especially for Yuri. As part of this fallout, Himari gets poached as the manager of a rival band, and Yuri's not happy about it. Oh, she pretends to be fine with it, telling Himari as much, but what have we learned about bottling up your feelings? Well, nothing yet, but we're about to. Volume 6 sees Yuri stewing in discontent and hating herself for it. Toward the start, she has a heart-to-heart with Himari, and at first, everything seems okay. Still wanting to mend broken friendships and make up for her mistake, Himari's willingly taken on the manager role of the rival band, and being the fundamentally honest person that she is very upfront about her desire for both the rival band and Yuri's band to do well in an upcoming competition. But, being conscious of how her precious girlfriend might be taking all of this, she asks Yuri upfront how she's feeling, whether she's upset about any of this, and with a smile on her face, Yuri says that all that matters is whether Himari's happy with it, and as long as she is, Yuri's on board. But that's a lie. The first lie she's ever told Himari, and it eats away at her, to the point that it starts interfering with their relationship. When they go on a karaoke date later in the volume, suddenly she realizes how close together they are in a small private space. Conscious of every little move Himari makes, Yuri feels the mood getting more intimate and psychs herself up to make a move. But just before she can go in for a kiss, excited about what's going on in her life lately, Himari pulls out her phone to show off something cool she's been working on. A recording of the rival band's practice session, and all of Yuri's jealous feelings come crashing back into her, killing the mood. Oblivious, Himari tries to make a move herself, but Yuri pushes her away, another first for the couple. Himari's hurt, obviously, and trying to alleviate her fears, Yuri straight up lies to her. Again, saying the mood wasn't right, not wanting her precious other half to think less of her for getting so worked up over her spending time with another girl, even in a non-romantic context. She lies. The lies are piling on top of each other now, and sooner or later something has to give. They can't keep at it like this. Their relationship was built on a foundation of honesty, after all. If Yuri keeps this up, will it all come crumbling down? Will she even be the same person Himari fell in love with? It all comes to a head in the next chapter, the climax of the volume, the festival date. Yuri goes into it determined to make things right, but a quick run-in with rival band girl, wherein said girl gets a little too handsy for Yuri's liking, leaves her feeling cold. She pulls away, only for Himari to give chase and twist her ankle in the attempt. They sit down, and even now Yuri tries to lie her way out, but with tears in her eyes, Himari finally manages to drag the truth out of her. She talks about how much she hates Himari being that band's manager, being the object of another girl's affection. Look how they got here. In trying to avoid hurting Himari, Yuri piles on lie after lie, just for Himari to end up getting hurt anyway, leading to their first real argument. But once the truth is out, what does Himari do? She doesn't scold Yuri for her jealousy or think any less of her. No. Instead, right away, she volunteers to quit being the band's manager because her own situation doesn't matter to her nearly as much as Yuri's happiness. What matters to Himari isn't that Yuri was feeling jealous. The only thing that hurt her was being lied to. And once that's behind them, coming back together and getting in sync is all too easy. The lies sowed discord, and the truth set them free. Free enough to finally come together and share their first kiss against a backdrop of fireworks. To recap all this jazz so far, honesty forms the foundation of Himari and Yuri's relationship, solidified at a time when they're open and honest about their feelings to themselves, their friends, and each other. Later on, festering toxic emotions prompt Yuri to start lying to Himari, but in that effort to shield her from pain, she just causes more hurt. And it's only through being honest again that they're able to come together stronger than ever, reflecting the manga's overarching theme of honesty being the soul of a healthy relationship. As Himari herself says in Chapter 23, girlfriends shouldn't keep things from each other. Hey, I said this manga was good, not that it was subtle.
I know writers who use subtext, and they're all cowards.
So that's all fine and dandy, but there's also the second point I mentioned earlier, a more bombastic avenue by which this manga stretches this theme to its breaking point. Remember rival band girl? Yeah, it's her. Let's talk about Shiho goddamn Izumi, my favorite character in this whole shebang. Shiho is, to put it kindly, a hot mess. The early volumes give us but sparing glances of her. She only becomes a major player around the start of Volume 4. Her big entrance positions her as blatantly antagonistic. She's got a bit of a superiority complex going on, seems to have a history with Aki, the leader of Yuri's band, and taunts Yuri for being a subpar singer. Real villain shit, right? Especially after we've just spent the last 3 volumes hyping up Yuri's singing prowess. Where does she get off criticizing Yuri like that? Us readers are left to wonder. So we come out of this introduction with her quite comfortably positioned as a rival, someone to be challenged and taken down. We don't know what her deal is yet, but we're quite confident she needs to be pulled down off her high horse. But very quickly, we start peeling back the layers. Turns out, she's an absentee member of Himari's club, and with the both of them unaware of the other's affiliation with Aki's band, Himari and Shiho are able to start forming a rapport of their own, and we start to see a different side to her. Instead of antagonistic, aggressive, and full of herself, we see a confident, expressive young woman who really can't say no to a cute face, and maybe has a hard time saying what she really feels, but is happy to have someone around who appreciates her talents. And there's hints of a greater darkness in her, a need to prove her talents, her skills. Where does that drive come from, and how do you square the wildly different personalities she has on display? The posturing and arrogance she puts on around Aki, and the more easygoing attitude around Himari. What's also incredible about her introduction is this one tiny bit of dialogue from the end of chapter 18. After some teasing from band/clubmate Momoka, Shiho virulently denies having any fondness for Himari, which is heartbreaking for her. Upon seeing her expression, Shiho quickly retracts, to which Momoka again teases, "Would it kill you to be honest about your feelings once in a while, Shiho-chan?" And it's like, holy shit, that's it! So not only has Shiho been set up as the antagonist in terms of all the plot stuff, but both with the way she's been acting by hiding her feelings, and with that one line, she's also set up as Himari and Yuri's thematic opposite. She's the girl who embodies everything they don't, whose existence runs counter to the manga's prevailing theme. Where the main couple and the manga as a whole tout the virtue of honesty, Shiho is habitually dishonest. A girl who lies about her feelings, her motivations, her everything, and keeps all the worst things about herself locked up inside, and things only get worse from there. We've already talked about how Shiho's mere presence is a destabilizing element in Himari and Yuri's relationship, so let's jump around a little. Shiho's band has proven not just a competent rival to Aki's, but better in every way, but that just riles Aki up. See, they used to be bandmates, but just before the start of the manga, Shiho ditched Aki's band, and now Aki wants answers. Shiho refuses to budge, dodging Aki's questioning with lies and half-truths. We know she's a liar, or at least she has the capacity for it, because we've seen evidence just earlier that her projections of superiority are just an act. When checking the results of her band's audition for the upcoming school festival, she's at first nervous, then relieved, a face she can never show anyone but herself. And just later, Shiho slips and almost calls Aki a friend, before correcting herself, showing that she still harbors some affection but refuses to admit it. And so, the two settle on a bet. If Aki's band performs better at an upcoming school festival, Shiho will spill the beans. This bet becomes the catalyst behind just about every event in the following 4.5 volumes, climaxing in the showdown in Volume 9. Let me spell that out for you. The driving force underlying much of the drama for almost half of the current story is a bet where the stakes are the truth. Aki's driven to uncover it, Shiho's driven to hide it, but that's all everything is about. Honesty. As the story continues, we learn more about who Shiho is and what made her the way she is. In the distant past, her own insecurities about her musical talent drove her to accuse a good friend of deceiving her, seeding dishonesty in her from a young age, a seed given a chance to take root when said friend departs for good, with no chance for reconciliation. In the nearer past, an unrequited crush led her to start burying her feelings, creating a young woman for whom deception becomes the default, because if she never cops to these feelings feelings, no one can use them to hurt her. I'm being intentionally cagey about some of the details from the later volumes here because we're brushing up against some of the manga's more affecting moments, and with how much I've already laid out in detail, I wanted to leave at least a few surprises in place in case you, dear viewer who has not yet read this manga, ever decide to go and check it out for yourself, which I highly encourage. Suffice to say that toward the end of the school festival, she's only able to unburden herself and grow into a better person once she finally lets the truth out. And with that, I think I've done enough to give a decent idea of the layers of complexity propping up Shiho Izumi, and more importantly, how she functions as the manga's thematic antithesis. Because you see, the story of the relationship of Himari and Yuri, and the story of the heartbreak and redemption of Shiho Izumi are not two separate narratives that happen to brush up against each other. Rather, they are inexorably intertwined, both propping up and enhancing the meaning of one another. From Shiho being the provocateur that drives Yuri crazy, at first putting distance between her and Himari before they ultimately come together stronger than ever, to Himari being the kind, empathetic friend that Shiho never had but always needed, eventually driving her to be a better person. Shiho is Yuri's dark reflection, a representation of what she could become if she succumbs to all her worst instincts, and Himari is Shiho's guiding light, the driver of a better philosophy, one of honesty that can help Shiho save herself from herself. The emotional weight of both stories is only truly felt when you have both to inform the other, and that sort of narrative synthesis, baby, that's just good storytelling. There's a lot more to love about Whisper Me a Love Song than just its sweet and heartbreaking narratives, of course. One thing I hope's become obvious over the course of my ramblings is just how incredible of a character artist mangaka Eku Takashima is. From the gorgeous illustrations with the level of detail in the shading and hair that breathes life into these characters, to the wide range of expressions they can pull at seemingly the drop of a hat, there's always something on every page to marvel at. To stick with Shiho for a minute, look at the variety of expressions she cycles through over the course of just a couple of pages. Not only is Takashima absolutely showing off their artist chops here, communicating quite successfully Shiho's floundering emotions and showing just how much they're able to get across with a single illustration, but this penchant for expressiveness also helps to sell the dynamism of Shiho's character, walking emotional mess that she is. But fun as these little illustrations are, it's not just simple, easily readable emotions that Takashima excels at showing. They can showcase complexity, inner turmoil, with just a single look. And to show this, I want to take a look at one panel in particular. For context, in this scene in chapter 22, Aki, who's been very confused and hurt by how Shiho's been acting, has decided to go and confront her once friend and ask her to her face what's going on. With that determination made, the scene cuts in, Aki calls out to her, and we get this. Look at this. Look at the way her hair is frozen mid-swing, a clear visual cue to indicate that she's just turned her head to look and see who's called her. God, look at that expression on her face. How many emotions is this one look betraying, and how many more is it hiding? At this point, we know Shiho's hiding stuff, and this one off-guard look invites us to speculate. Look at the shock in those wide eyes and shrunk pupils. Look at the worry in those scrunched eyebrows. Look at the fear in that sweat. Look at how she's holding something in with those pinched lips. Look at her posture, arms folded in like she's hiding something, holding something in that she can't let go. Look at how much Takashima communicates with just a single panel on half a page. God, it's incredible! So yeah, that's Whisper Me a Love Song. It's a beautiful manga in every sense of the word. Beautiful illustrations, beautiful characters, beautiful everything. The core relationship between Himari and Yuri is heartwarming, so saccharine sweet that I can't help but smile every time I read it. Shiho's drama is so earnest, compelling, and heartbreaking that she's actually driven me to tears, and it's all built on a solid thematic foundation of honesty, which it wholly commits to, building it up, testing it, but never shattering it, thus giving the whole narrative an underlying cohesion. Even better on any given page, for any number of reasons, it's just gorgeous to look at. Between all of that and a whole lot more, seriously, I could go on, Whisper Me a Love Song sits comfortably as one of my favorite manga. And then they made an anime out of it. And it sucked. So, before we delve into the tragedy that is the Whisper anime itself, I want to first establish some production context. How did it get to the state it wound up in? The short answer is, we don't know. We only have bits and pieces of information from which to draw and speculate, so we're going to keep this brief. Following leaks from Twitter user Sugoi Light about an upcoming anime adaptation of Whisper Me a Love Song, a production was officially confirmed to be in the works on January 13th, 2023. Paired with this announcement were the names of the actors cast for the two leads, some of the production crew, including the director, scriptwriter, and character designer, and the production studio. Just 2 months later, on March 17th, additional cast members were announced, along with the slated January 2024 release date. Then, things get weird. A mere 2 months before the originally scheduled premiere, the first promotional video for the Whisper anime was released, and alongside it is a two-prong announcement. First, that the release is getting pushed back a full 3 months to April 2024. Second, that the previously announced director had been replaced, and that the animation production duties had been taken over by the original studio's parent company. According to a Twitter post from the anime's official account, the director had to step down due to health reasons, but there was still no explanation as to the shift in studio, and little did we know that this was a sign of the troubles ahead. We were naive, we were optimistic. As one user commented on the promotional video,
"I'm actually happy this is getting delayed. It means they care about the quality of the show. I can't wait to see my favorite ever manga properly animated. Himari and Yuri look incredible."
Oh, Phantom 373, I am so sorry. Fast forward to April, and the first episode airs to generally positive reception. It wasn't the most visually stunning production in the world, but it faithfully adapted the first 2.5 chapters with a little extra flourish, so people were generally happy with it. Even I tweeted positively about it at the time, sweet summer child that I was, but things just went downhill from there. As more and more episodes dropped, the show was marred by a notable drop in visual quality, from rough or absent animation to subpar baseline illustrations. Starting from episode 3, each episode had an entirely different crew listed, later episodes starting skipping whole swaths of material, and then the delays.
Oh my goodness!
After the airing of episode 8, there was a 3-week delay before episode 9 was broadcast. Then, following episode 10, there was another delay, one that lasted 6 months. Let me say that again. If you were following this show as it aired, after most of it had already released, you had to wait a whole 6 months in order to watch the last 2 episodes. 6 months for 2 episodes! That is not normal! Amidst this delay, in October of 2024, the website of Cloud Hearts, the original animation studio behind the anime, went offline, and as far as anyone can tell, since the company has been delisted from its parent company's website, the studio has shuttered for good. Finally, as the last nail in the coffin of this disaster of a production, in January of 2025, the anime's official website announced that the show's Blu-ray release had been cancelled, and that was all she wrote. So, what went wrong? Behind the scenes, what sort of drama unfurled that caused all that mess and the subsequent messy product? Well, unfortunately, we don't know for sure and probably never will. The only source of information I've been able to locate online is this thread from a Twitter user named Patty, who claimed to have gotten in contact with one of the production staff. The information in this thread alleges awful mismanagement, rampant outsourcing, and vile working conditions, which at one point resulted in a staff walkout. I cannot claim to know the accuracy of these allegations, but given the state of the final product, I am inclined to believe there's some truth to them. If the production was even half as messy as this thread alleges, then this project was doomed from the start. One thing that thread stresses though, and one thing I want to repeat, is that none of this was the fault of the animators who poured their blood, sweat, and tears into this production. With how awful their working conditions allegedly were, it's a miracle that anything got to screen in the first place. None of them are to blame. And so, before we really start tearing the final product apart, in order to pay respect to the hardworking artists who slaved away at this thing with the best of intentions, I want to first highlight all the things I think this anime adaptation got right. As I stated earlier, the anime's first episode was generally well received, and not without reason. In terms of animation, this is the nicest this show ever looks. My favorite shot from this episode is just this quick little gag of Yuri being embarrassed, which is translated pretty literally from the manga, but with a few extra frames of animation to help give it a little pop. This episode covered the first 2 chapters of the manga and a little from chapter 3, but it wasn't a straightforward panel-for-panel recreation. Instead, the episode was actually a little clever in how it covered events. See, chapter 1 covered Himari's first day at school, the concert, meeting Yuri at the lockers, then meeting her again on the roof. Chapter 2 covers those same events, but from Yuri's perspective. In the context of separate chapters, that works great, but when you know you're going to be covering both chapters in a single episode, it would feel repetitive to revisit events you just witnessed a few minutes ago. So, cleverly, in this episode, both points of view are presented at once. This helps streamline the storytelling, and as a bonus, gives the episode a little breathing room in terms of runtime, allowing it to add in short, original scenes, further fleshing out the main pair toward the start of the episode. In short, the episode examined the source material and figured out how to fit it into the new structure of a 20-odd minute television episode. The result is a seamless blend that turns 2 distinct chapters into a single complete package. So, good on them. My favorite bit from this episode, though, isn't even any of that. It's this tiny little blink and you'll miss it cutaway to Aki, a bit over 10 minutes into the episode. In context, Yuri has just confessed to the group that she's fallen in love with Himari, and as soon as she says that, we cut to a very brief reaction shot. This is the first hint that Aki's in love with Yuri, and Yuri's confession has her feeling conflicted. Aki's unrequited crush goes on to have huge ramifications throughout the rest of the story, but this little shot isn't just noteworthy because it hints at how Aki feels, but because it's entirely anime original. This shot just straight up does not exist in the manga, where it takes until the end of volume 1 before we learn about Aki's feelings. The artist behind the anime, having the benefit of hindsight, no doubt knew the significance of this plot point, and so decided to add just a little nod to it right here in the first episode. Is it terribly important? No, but it is neat, and it shows that behind the scenes someone absolutely understood the story they were telling, and were doing their damnedest to do it justice. The next bit I want to highlight is the anime's take on a small moment from the end of volume 3. For context, after a big performance, Himari and Yuri have finally become an official couple. It's a big happy moment for everyone, but remember, Aki's still got her unrequited crush. So, in a little epilogue scene, Aki is sitting alone at home, feeling conflicted, happy that Yuri's happy, sad that it's not her who gets to make her happy, when Yuri calls to thank her for being her best friend, and this gives Aki some small joy. She's still crying, but with a smile on her face. The anime, though, does it a little different. The show's equivalent scene comes toward the end of episode 6. In this version of the scene, the dialogue is basically the same, except there's one crucial change. Instead of taking place sometime later and over a phone call, the scene takes place just after the main couple become official, right outside the venue where they just performed. This has a few notable effects. For one, getting to this moment of catharsis sooner rather than just at some nebulous point in the future just tightens up the pacing. For another, being able to have this conversation in person heightens its emotional impact. Aki being able to look Yuri in the eye, see her happiness, and commit to their friendship just hits that much harder than the same thing happening over a phone call. Finally, this conversation happening face to face allowed the animators to spice things up. Not bound to following the manga panel for panel, they were able to get creative in terms of blocking and framing the shots and livening up the scene with bits of animation that simply would not have been possible had the scene stayed in its original setting. Seriously, the extra facial expressions they're able to add simply by having the two look at each other really helps sell the banter, reinforce their playful dynamic. It's a really creative and thoughtful interpretation of the original scene, one that elevates the already present emotions into something somehow even more touching. I'm not kidding when I say I think the anime did this scene better than the manga. This is the only time you'll hear me say that. A few other small things. There's this bit in episode 5 where Himari is monologuing about feeling bad about keeping Yuri waiting for a response to her confession when she knows Aki's also in love with her, and the manga just shows that she's flashing back to Aki's confrontation and that Himari's feeling alone in this black void. In the anime equivalent scene, while she's delivering that same monologue, the show instead decides to cut to concurrent events at the other side of the school, with Yuri strumming her guitar and Aki watching over her with a forlorn expression. So it's communicating the same ideas, but in a more direct manner, and I thought that change was neat. Not important, but neat. Well, also in this same episode toward the end, there's this one cool shot where Yuri and Aki are having a conversation in the foreground while Himari in the background notices them. This is a neat little adaptation because the manga version of this is just 2 separate panels, which in that context is fine, and the anime finding a way to take those same 2 panels, then take advantage of the full widescreen frame that it's working with to show both things happening at once is cool, and the sort of thing I wish this adaptation did more often. It may seem like a simple thing, and it is, but I wanted to say all this now because in a few minutes, or maybe more than a few minutes, oh god, what am I doing? Don't check the runtime. In a few minutes, I'm going to be complaining about how so often the anime doesn't do this. That is, take advantage of its full frame, instead just replicating manga panels, but we'll get there. In the meantime, the potential for thoughtful adaptation was there. Another cool thing, the first time we hear Shiho's band perform in episode 7 is pretty impactful. In the manga, this is the moment where Aki et al. Realize that Shiho's group is a powerhouse, a real oh shit moment. So the anime really needed them to play something hard-hitting, and credit where it's due, when you first hear those sick guitar riffs and Shiho's soulful singing in stark contrast to all the music that's come before, which was relatively upbeat, well, it's pretty shocking, exactly as it needed to be. Also helps that this is the best animation the show ever receives, though there are some presentation complaints you can make in terms of raw emotion. This scene kinda nailed it. What else? The voice acting was good, I suppose, yeah. All the actors did their jobs, nothing to complain about there. And the soundtrack ranged from decent to good, so there's that, and that's it. That's all I could find to highlight as being good. Looking back, the trend in all the good things I could find was that the show's best material seemed to be small, thoughtful additions or details, little things that accentuated the narrative. What I hope all of this demonstrated was that there were indeed talented, hard-working creatives on this show who really got the material and wanted to do the best by it they could. Unfortunately, due to, allegedly, their working environment, them doing their best did not matter. So now, let's tear down all their hard work. Going forward, I've got a few key points I want to focus on. Lackluster animation, taking things too literally, tonal problems, music, and the cuts. Let's take those one at a time. So, the primary appeal of seeing any print medium adapted to screen is being able to see things move. Right? Part of the manga's appeal is just appreciating the gorgeous, detailed artwork, but you can't maintain that level of detail if you hope to cram somewhere between 8 and 12, or 24 if you're feeling fancy, drawings into the span of a single second for 20-odd minutes straight. So, the trade-off when going from manga to anime is streamlining the artwork so as to better facilitate the timely creation of as many frames of animation as the production team can manage. Unfortunately, this was not a well-produced show, so we only got the first half of that trade-off. Streamlined artwork, but not a whole lot of animation to show for it. Not only does this make the show visually unengaging, but it has the effect of dulling the impact, visceral or emotional, of scenes where animation was warranted. For example, there's this scene toward the end of Volume 8 where Aki confronts Shiho, and the panel I want to highlight is this one, right at the end of Chapter 38. Nothing too complicated going on here, but it does make for an effective cliffhanger. The wind blowing through their hair as Shiho stands frozen in shock and Aki looks on, bracing herself. If you were adapting this scene to animation, how would you do it? It's not a complicated shot, just two characters looking at each other, so maybe just their hair blowing in the wind, maybe show Shiho trembling a little if you want to get fancy with it, or Aki stiffening her posture as she readies to speak. Again, nothing complicated, just a little something to put emphasis on the moment. Alright, so now that I've got some ideas about how this scene should look in animation bouncing through your head, let's see how the anime actually handled it in its adaptation of this shot, about 2/3 of the way through episode 11.
少し話そうよ。
I have to admit, when I saw that, I laughed. A mostly static illustration with a handful of mouth flaps, and you can hear the wind blowing in the background despite their hair being completely still. This is so jarring because the information the show is providing to my ears is contradicting the information being blasted into my eyeballs, and my brain cannot make sense of it. This little moment, small as it is a microcosm of the show's animation troubles. You'll be watching and some narratively significant moment comes along, but the visual presentation falls flat, so instead of the scene landing, you're just left feeling confused. For simple moments like this, and for stronger emotional beats, if this show can't get the simple stuff right, do you really think it has a shot at the hard stuff? I've got other examples I could go through, scenes where animation really could have accentuated the drama, but was just wholly absent, but for the sake of brevity, haha, let's just pick one more. Take this scene from the beginning of Volume 5. Shiho's just put on a shocking performance and has entered a confrontation with Aki. She taunts her about a secret she shouldn't know and brags about being a better singer than Yuri, but Aki doesn't rise to her jabs and remains insistent that she, Yuri, her whole squad rules. Shiho, frustrated that Aki doesn't get it, that she can't say what she really means, snaps and grabs Aki by the collar, screaming in her face that Aki's attitude is why their bands are on different levels, but even this is still just half-truths, and realizing the futility of this confrontation with what she's forcing herself to hold back, Shiho gives up, lets go, twirls around, and leaves. It's a great scene, one that reinforces the rivalry the two have found themselves in, and the pain it brings them both, while also hinting at Shiho's tucked-away motivations for acting as she does. But we're concerned with adaptation here, so again, let's consider how this might look in animation. For my money, I'm most concerned with that grab. How fast does she latch onto Aki's collar, and how hard? The advantage of adapting this scene to animation is you get to answer all those questions, show us Shiho's physicality in a way the manga couldn't, and in so doing provide another lens by which to analyze her character. After all, it would amount to a huge difference in characterization if she were to gently grab the collar versus forcibly, right? So now that I've primed you for disappointment, let's see how the anime handled this scene.
きっとステージ枠ももらえるはずだし。枠がもらえるかどうかで考えてる時点で
That's right, they didn't! They just cut away to a shot of background art and shook the camera. By cutting away from the action such that we only hear it before seeing the aftermath, what could have been an exciting moment is instead turned into visual whiplash. And it's not just the animation. Remember, when adapting manga to animation, we're generally sacrificing detailed artwork for fluid animation, but even in the moments that call for still shots or single illustrations, the anime still has a bad habit of falling flat on its face. Remember that illustration I showed you earlier of Shiho, about whose complexity I was absolutely gushing? That's right, that was actually a setup for this comparison. You want to see the anime's take on it? Here you go! God, just look at it, where I could stare at the manga panel for minutes at a time, digesting and interpreting the swath of emotions pulling across her face. Here in the anime, she just looks sort of vaguely startled. I just can't take this version of the scene seriously. Now, to be completely transparent, the anime's take on the illustration is in fact a single blink and you'll miss it frame of a brief bit of animation, and you're right, it's not fair to hold a single frame of animation to the same standard as a single manga illustration. But the animation it's a part of is so brief and stiff and chooses just after to freeze on a frame so much less expressive that I don't think you can argue the trade-off was worth it. If you were going to do a freeze frame of Shiho's reaction anyway, why not just have it be this one? Polish her expression a little, maybe have her hair fluttering, add some lip flaps, and we'd have nothing to complain about. Instead, they chose to freeze on this much less expressive wide shot, and it just feels like we're making the wrong creative choices at every given opportunity here. At the risk of sounding like I'm beating a dead horse, I've got one more example I want to show you. There's this shot of Aki late in Volume 8 where she's just been hit with a big truth bomb and is reinterpreting all these memories in the wake of it. Oh, look at it, it's great. The dark shading, her shell-shocked expression, and the anime version in comparison is just... Look at her being perfectly well lit despite that dark background. Look at her frozen hair. Look at her vaguely sad expression. Look at those static JPEGs flying into her. It's so silly, it's downright comedic, outright destroying the scene's emotional resonance. And that's the whole issue, isn't it? These lackluster presentation issues have the effect of just sucking the soul out of any given scene. They're distracting is what they are. Alone, one or two of these issues would be just vague irritants once, but cropping up time and time again across the entire series, the effects stack up. It's death by 1,000 cuts. When eventually you can't stop noticing how shoddy the presentation is, it's that much harder to pay attention to the underlying narrative, no matter how strong that narrative is. To be clear, this isn't the only thing wrong with the show. If it was just this, I wouldn't be making this video. I could live with it if it was just this, but it's not. There's so much more. Also, have you seen those completely static CG crowds? By God, they're hideous! Another contributor to the show's generally dull, unimaginative presentation is a not quite universal, but all too frequent penchant for a literal interpretation of the manga's microstructure. What I mean by that is the show often treats the manga as a storyboard, where each shot correlates to one panel after the next in the exact order you saw it in the manga, sometimes going as far as to replicate multiple panels, limited size and all, on screen at the same time in the exact layout from the manga. Now, before we get into some examples, let me take a moment to explain. Why is this the problem? If the manga is good, then surely replicating what it did will make for a good show, right? To a certain extent, that is true, and for some scenes, such as low-energy dialogue exchanges where all you really need is shot-reverse shot framing, then such an approach can be perfectly serviceable. Not anything to write home about, takes very little in the way of imagination to approach scene direction like this, but you know, it'll do. It's when you start relying on it as the default approach, applying it to scenes where the adaptation really needs to employ a little imagination, that problems start to emerge, creating oddities where previously there were none. Returning to a scene we've already looked at, remember the whole Shiho grabbing Aki bit where they just cut away to a static shot of the wall instead of animating the grab? Very weird to watch, right? Let's take a look at the equivalent scene in the manga. Here, we can see Shiho scrunching her lips before a panel of mostly white space with some action lines. Then we turn the page and see she's grabbed her. So just as the manga did not draw Shiho reaching out to grab Aki, so too did the anime not animate that same action. But here's the thing, this still worked better in the manga. The action lines tell you that something, you don't know what, is happening, and then, because you are holding this book in your hands, or reading it online, I guess, you get to dictate the pacing, so it's up to you to turn the page and reveal the surprise of what she's done. The manga uses its medium, its existence, as a physical book with limited space on the page, as an object you have to move through to create tension and reveal a surprise. Furthermore, it's paramount to recognize a page of manga as a single piece, every panel therein part of a larger whole. The composition of this illustration isn't just Shiho grabbing Aki, it's also her deflating as she casts her gaze down and letting go. All of these actions must be viewed as parts of the whole composition. That's why the white space at the bottom of the previous page works. It's still part of the whole page, continuous with and existing alongside the illustration of Shiho above. And then we have the anime. It follows along with the manga, yes, replicating panel after panel in the exact order the manga had them, but animation is a different medium with different strengths, and quite notably, a different frame. With its 16:9 aspect ratio, typically limited to one shot per composition, it inherently cannot produce the same effect as a manga with multiple panels per composition. By following the manga panel by panel, using said panels as basically a storyboard, you lose the surprise of the page turn revealing the grab, instead leaving viewers confused by spending seconds staring at an essentially blank screen, itself now a whole composition instead of a part of one. Now, instead of Shiho yelling, deflating, and letting go being continuous actions, they're all separate, taking up the entire screen one at a time. A more effective adaptation would have recognized that it would not be well served by having the viewers staring at a mostly blank screen, and instead animated Shiho's hand darting out to snatch Aki. A more effective adaptation would have held on this shot, taking advantage of its ability to make things move to animate Shiho deflecting and backing away as part of one continuous action. But instead, we got a literal adaptation, all too often content to use each individual panel as a storyboard, in so doing, robbing them of the effectiveness they held as part of their original medium and failing to take advantage of the strengths of the new medium. And this isn't even the worst of it. Dearest viewers, this was a tame example. Do you want to see a montage of a bunch of times the anime just replicated multiple panels on the screen at the same time with an identical or near identical layout to their manga counterparts? No? Too bad. Don't get me wrong, if this was an isolated thing or if it was more creatively employed, I wouldn't be complaining. This sort of split screen effect does have its uses. For example, and this might seem random, y'all ever seen the show 24? Given my usual audience, probably not, and I'm not telling you to rush out and see it or anything. 24 is this extremely post-9/11, oh, the terrorists are gonna destroy our country, and the only way to stop them is to send in the one straight white dude brave enough to break the rules, sort of deal. And all that's like, bleh, who cares, whatever. But that's not why I bring it up. What makes it relevant to our discussion here, what makes it so popular and such a fun watch despite its everything, is its gimmick. See, 24 runs in real time, with every episode taking place over the course of an hour. Every once in a while, a beeping timer will flash up on screen to remind the viewer that, yes, this is all happening in real time. The show's adherence to this gimmick is seemingly strict, but with it comes a problem. If everything is happening in real time, what do you do when logically two characters are doing important things at the same time? Cheat. Timeline. Obviously, plenty of cheating if you go look for it.
That's right, we're gonna cheat.
But that's the secondary answer. The primary, most obvious solution the show employs is the split screen. It's used to various effects, sometimes as a transition, like this scene in the first episode where we start with a group on a balcony, one receives a phone call, we watch both perspectives on the call, and close the scene on the other's perspective and continue the scene in the new location. Other times, it's used to reinforce the real-time gimmick, with episodes ending with multiple panels, as it were, showcasing where we're leaving all the various plot lines for the episode. Oh wow, look at all these things happening at the same time. What will happen next? Boom, cliffhanger. Point is, 24 effectively uses this split screen gimmick to ratchet up the pacing and show simultaneous action, something that would have been impossible if they stuck to the conventional format of only showing one shot on screen at a time. So there we have the two primary use cases for the split screen in the context of a film or TV show: increased pacing and showcasing simultaneous action. And do you think the Whisper anime used this gimmick to those effects? Come on, you know the answer, of course it didn't. It just did it because that's how it was in the manga. Look at this. They're just replicating the panels on screen in the exact layout from the manga, with extra white space thanks to the wider frame, panels which convey continuous action, not simultaneous. They don't even bother to animate the first one, and they freeze the middle panel once they move on to the third. Again, the split screen effect in TV and film is best used to convey simultaneous action. Its use is entirely inappropriate for continuous action, which the show accidentally demonstrates by making the viewer stare at a static screen for the bulk of its duration. This gimmick has no function or purpose here. The only reason it is present is because that's how the manga did it, an adaptation philosophy that crops up so much that it seems a crutch, but that's not good enough. This is a new medium with its own strengths that this show fails time after time to take advantage of, as demonstrated by those poor split-screen effects and as demonstrated by its use of panels as storyboards, and we're not nearly done. Everything we've discussed up until now has been the condensed form of my observations taken during my revisit of the manga and anime, a revisit carried out for the purpose of creating this video. But long before that revisit, back when I first started watching this show as it aired, even then I knew something was off. Something was scratching at the back of my mind, but I couldn't put my finger on it. I knew the result. I would watch a scene and think, huh, that was kind of awkward or weird. Why's that? How is it that I can go and read the manga and have a perfectly splendid time smiling along at all the silly little things these silly little characters say and do, and then go and watch the anime, listen as professional voice actors act out that exact same dialogue, and cringe? The cause of that confusion I could never place. Until now. What I've come to realize is that this adaptation has a problem with tone, both in consistency and in finding the right one to begin with, and that problem often causes otherwise decent scenes to fall flat. For example, this show will have instances where it's picked a tone for a scene that on the face of it should work, right? But then that tone will end up at odds with the show's adaptation philosophy of strict adherence to the manga, where that tone fits some, but most definitely not all, of the scene. Take a look at this scene from Chapter 7. It's a relatively serious heart-to-heart between Himari and Yuri, where Himari tells Yuri how she's been feeling since Yuri's earlier confession, and they figure out what their relationship's going to look like going forward. For a second, it risks becoming a downer, but instead of going too far in that direction, Takashima inserts a quick, chibi-fied panel to lighten the mood and course correct. In the manga, this works. There's no music telling you how to feel, and all the characters' voices are in your head. The tone is thus, in part, something you create. But when adapting to anime, there's a whole bunch of additional factors to consider. Coloring, lighting, the voice actors' performances, the music, all of that can affect the tone. So when adapting scenes like this, you've got to make a choice. Do you try to maintain a consistent tone? If so, you might need to change some things in order to maintain tonal consistency, i.e. drop the chibis if you're aiming for a serious tone. If you're aiming for a more fluid tone, then you have to make sure all the contributing factors act accordingly. With that in mind, how do you think they handled this scene?
私、先輩のことが好きです。でも、その好きは恋愛とは違って。
そうだよね。
いや、違うっていうか、
Yeah, that was just awkward, right? The scene maintains a quiet ambience in the background and restrained performances from the actors, all of which communicate and maintain a serious tone. But it also keeps in place the chibi drawings, which clash with that serious tone. That clash just pulls you right out of the scene, and suddenly it's that much harder to get invested in it. This sort of tonal clash happens all the time. To the show's credit, sometimes it'll drop the chibis to maintain a single tone, but just as often there'll be a blunder just like that. And it's not just the chibi stuff. That one scene is simply emblematic of a larger trend of tonal problems throughout the show. Like, look at this one scene earlier in that same episode. In the manga, it's a mostly serious conversation that throws in some exaggerated visuals for comedic relief. The anime preserves the same comedic visuals, but the entire scene plays out with this sad piano music, completely clashing with and killing that comedic effect.
そうだよね。あの時のミキちゃん、めっちゃ嬉しそうだったから。うっさい。まあでも。
It's a show at war with itself. They either could have changed the visuals to match the single tone they were going for, or they could have done more work on the presentation to match the manga's multi-tonal approach. But the half measures in the final product just come off as confused and inconsistent. Basically, not a fun watch. Up until now, we've discussed all the show's minor faults, the million tiny mistakes that make it an ungraceful adaptation. All that stuff is bad, yes, and taken together make for a much worse experience than the manga. But if that was all of it, I think I could still find it in my heart to forgive this show. I'd still never watch it again, but hey, it'd be a solid 5 out of 10. Maybe a 6. Ooh. But it's these next 2 points that turn this show from meh to straight up bad. The first issue cements its status as bad from the perspective of adaptation, of failing to take advantage of the transition from page to screen to do justice to the source material. The next and final issue is concerned with pure narrative butchery. Either of those mistakes alone were a death knell for this show. Together, they make this anime downright radioactive, to be avoided at all costs. First, let's talk about music. Music is at the heart of the narrative of Whisper Me a Love Song. Yori's in a band, and her music sways Himari's heart. The midpoint and climax of Shiho's arc center on some scene-stealing performances. Hell, it's even the title of the story. Whisper Me a Love Song. Song. Music is as fundamental an element to this story as hydrogen is to water. Without it, you just have gas. But of course, any manga that chooses music as a focus is going to have to deal with the inherent limitations of its medium. It's print. There is no music, not really, just the idea of it. Therefore, the manga has to make full use of the tools at its disposal to communicate everything about the in-world songs. What they sound like, how well they're performed, how they make the musicians and their audience feel, things like that. What tools does this manga use? Performance reviewing dialogue? Check. Mood setting artwork? Check. And, most importantly for our discussion, inner monologues that show how the songs make the characters feel. There's no two ways about it. Lacking the ability to hear this manga's music for ourselves, the most straightforward and efficient manner to communicate to us, the readers, how that music makes the characters feel is to have them think about it. You could argue that it is an inelegant solution, but given the limitations of the medium, I would argue it's too useful a tool to pass up. All that being said, that does open up an interesting possibility for any screen adaptation, doesn't it? By moving to a medium with sound, we're now able to hear for ourselves the music at the heart of the narrative, and because the music is now present, that means we don't need to rely as much on the tools that were employed to make up for its absence. Instead of having the characters narrate about how a song is making them feel, an effective adaptation could show us how they felt by composing and playing for us a song designed to elicit the emotional reaction that the scene calls for. That, paired with an effective visual presentation that shows the characters reacting in real time to the music, would have communicated the same information as the inner monologue, but in a more effective manner better suited to the new medium. That is how you make a strong adaptation. This is not a strong adaptation. Just take a look at the very first performance, the inciting incident of the whole goddamn story. In the manga, Himari shows up to the first day of school with her best friend Miki and attends a welcoming ceremony, part of which entails a student band performing. And she's enraptured from the very first moment Yuri opens her mouth, the manga dedicating a whole 2-page spread to show how Yuri has immediately become her entire world, while Himari narrates how cool she is. For the manga, that's great. Perfect. Says everything it needs to say. But when you're transitioning from page to screen, you wouldn't copy that word for word, would you? No, of course not. As we've discussed, animation is a new medium with new strengths, with sound. Ideally, you'd take advantage of those new strengths. Instead of having Himari narrate over everything, which on screen can come off as clunky, you would instead hone in on the music. You know, the most pivotal element of the scene. Let that do all the talking, in the way you can only do when making a film or TV episode. So of course, instead of that, when the show gets to this scene, it does this. So, instead of taking advantage of the new medium to produce a performance that shows us how the characters are feeling, the show chose to keep the narration that, in the new medium, just tells us how the characters are feeling. This is extremely clumsy. There are ways to take advantage of the new medium to put on a performance that shows how a character feels without narration. In case you're wondering just what the hell I'm talking about, let's jump back in time and delve a little into a counterexample. Y'all remember Haruhi? I'm going to assume you do. If not, go watch it. I'm not going to explain it. This video is long enough already. What we're concerned with here is a scene from episode 12, or 26, depending on how you count. Again, I'm not explaining this. You know the one. Kyon's nodding off as a bunch of students perform music in the auditorium. Then, just as it starts raining, forcing people to crowd into the auditorium, much to Kyon's chagrin, Haruhi waltzes up on stage in that stupid-ass bunny girl outfit, and for the next nearly 6 minutes, we're absolutely goddamn swept away by one of the greatest animated performances ever produced. All of the key ingredients are here. Meaningful lyrics that lend insight into the character's emotional states, and a visual presentation that complements and enhances those emotions. On the lyrical side, Haruhi's always been characterized by a fierce determination to stave off boredom and live an interesting life, so much so that she's often alienated others. And so when she finds people who don't just tolerate her but seem to enjoy being with her, she latches onto them, digs her claws in deep, especially for Kyon, who just might be the most important person in the world to her. The lyrics and the performance thereof thus reflect Haruhi's passion, her relentless determination to keep this guy at her side even if she can't or won't put a label on what those feelings are. I'll follow you. No matter where you are in the darkness of this bitter world, you will shine and exceed the limits of the future. Simply put, Haruhi is goddamn screaming at Kyon that he is hers and she is his, and that he, like no one else, helps her feel alive and gives her hope for a future freed from melancholy. It's a love letter in lyrical form, and it's goddamn beautiful. And the story told by the lyrics is accentuated by the visual presentation. As I said, Haruhi has always been characterized by her fierceness, and that's reflected perfectly in the animation. Look at the sheer goddamn grit in her expression, that unwavering determination as she belts out the lyrics, animated in incredible detail by the late, great Futoshi Nishiya. Even if you couldn't hear the lyrics or Aya Hirano's heartfelt performance thereof, you can get a read on the exact emotions storming through Haruhi from this animation alone. That animation, paired with the lyrics and the performance, it's goddamn magic! Those elements, lyrics, visuals, performance, all weave together to tell one story. The story of a young woman who's feeling so many things so intensely she can barely understand herself, so all she can do is get up on stage and sing it all out. And, most importantly, those elements, lyrics, visuals, and performance, are all the scene needed. Notice what wasn't there? That's right, there was no narration. Can you even imagine if 10-20 seconds into the performance, the music suddenly faded a little so that Haruhi could cut in with narration like, "Kyon-kun, these are my feelings, please, hear them." That would have been garbage, right? It would have been a complete redundancy. We didn't need Haruhi to tell us how she was feeling because all of the elements of the scene wove together to show us how she felt. And of course, the Whisper anime does none of that. In the first episode, instead of crafting a visual presentation that shows us how the characters feel, the scene relies on copying Himari's narration word for word from the manga to tell us how she feels. Instead of crafting a performance that demonstrates Yuri's nervous emotional state going in, with lyrics that complement that emotional state or serve as a thematic foundation for the narrative going forward, the animation portrays a rather relaxed, confident performance from Yuri, with lyrics that are just sort of generic love song lyrics, carrying little, if any, meaning for either the performer or the recipient. It's just clumsy, a total failure to take advantage of the new medium to craft a scene that uses all of the new tools at its disposal to communicate the same information as in the manga, instead content to just do what the manga did, even when that weakens the scene in the new medium. This is a mistake the show repeats again and again and again, often subtly lowering the music in the audio mix to make room for the narration. As I hope has been made clear, that's a terrible choice because the music should be the focus, not the narration. Lowering it like that just further emphasizes that this show had no confidence in the presentation of its performances to communicate the narrative beats they needed to hit, and instead relied on narration from the manga as a clutch. The one deviation from this trend is Shiho et al.'s performance in episode 7, but that's the exception that proves the rule. It's the best scene in the show because it lets the song speak for itself for tens of seconds before the narration cuts in, allowing you, the viewer, time to get lost in the music and interpret for yourself how it's making all the characters feel based purely on the sound. None of the other performances in the show even come close to that level of adaptational intelligence. Every other scene is as content as the first to let clumsy inner monologues override the music which is supposed to be at the heart of everything. And you know what? The performance in episode 1, that isn't even the worst example. No, that's Dishonor. goes to episode 8 and its portrayal of what in the manga is meant to be the most beautiful yet heartbreaking performance in the whole narrative. For context, in chapter 25, Shiho has just started to open up to Himari about herself and is narrating a flashback. Back when she was a kid, Shiho already had a bit of a prideful streak going. She was an expert violinist, and it was at one of her performances that she met a good friend, Kyo, just a silly little kid who lost her toy, which Shiho helps her find. They bond over their shared hobby, and Kyo gushes about how much she loves Shiho's playing, because of course she loves it. Shiho's awesome. But eventually, it was time for her to listen to Kyo perform, and Shiho's locked in, ready to analyze Kyo's performance so she can give her tips to help her improve. And then it's the most beautiful sound in the world, and Shiho has never felt more betrayed. Kyo's not just a good violinist, she's so goddamn talented she makes Shiho look like a fool. Her pride is wounded. She knows now she's not as good as she thought she was, and she feels lied to. All this time, Kyo was gassing her up, but she was the talented one, not her. And so, a mess of turbulent emotions, Shiho lashes out at the girl she thought was her best friend, puts down the violin for good, and leaves Kyo behind for what she doesn't realize will be forever. It's an immature act, yes, but right in line with her personality and youth. More importantly, this one moment, Kyo's performance and Shiho's heartbroken reaction, is one of the most pivotal events in her life. The moment where everything changed. The moment where she set out on a new path that led her to the guitar and all the present-day drama. A moment so important that Takashima had to dedicate a whole 2-page spread just to Kyo playing. I mean, goddamn, look at that! Look at the absolute serenity on Kyo's face as she plays, her twirling hair implying graceful motion. Look at the shock in Shiho's eyes, the dark shading slowly overcoming her. Did I mention how much I love this manga? Point is, this scene is a pivotal moment in both Shiho's story and the larger narrative, and it is crucial that any adaptation lend this scene the attention it needs as demanded by the weight it carries. And look, even following the anime's literal interpretation policy, they were already keyed up for success. Shiho's monologue bookends Kyo's performance, but it does not interrupt it. Even the manga recognized that Kyo's performance needed room to breathe on its own. All the anime needed to do then was as it always did. Follow the manga. If it can just show us Kyo playing the violin with enough ability to impress a child, then we're golden. With that said, let's see how the anime handled this scene, and I promise I did not edit this clip.
私はこの時初めて気づいた。バイオリンは私の一番だったけど。バイオリンの一番は私じゃないと。
It didn't even fucking bother. A static pose with a few frames of animation just for the hair. We don't see Shiho's reaction until after the performance, and worst of all, we didn't even get to hear Kyo play. They just pasted in part of the show's soundtrack, a piece which has played before and will play again, i.e. a piece with no inherent meaning specific to the scene, a piece which just communicates a general, vague emotion of sad, which ain't exactly tonally accurate. Hey, future Tyranno here, deep in the editing bay. So when I said that thing just now, that the song I played before and it would play again, that was just sort of off the cuff, going off my memory. Like, I didn't go back and check, but in scrubbing through the footage to assemble this video, I found where this song had played previously, and it was previously in this same goddamn episode, the scene where Aki challenges Shiho to their duel.
聞き間違い？ SS がローレラより上って聞こえちゃったわ。そう言ったの。私はこの時初めて気づいた。
And it's like, what those two scenes, they don't have the same emotion. Not at all. The confrontation is tense, and the Kyo thing is very, very devastating. Like, that's not, why would you put the same track there? I don't get it. All of which together rob the scene of any and all impact it might have otherwise had. And that's the trend, isn't it? All across the show, lackluster production value, strict adherence to the wrong parts in the manga, and inability to take advantage of the strengths of the medium, all of that coalescing into just an absolute mess of a presentation that robs so many narrative beats of their emotional weight. And I'm saddened to say, that all ain't even the worst part. Okay, so, you know the point I've been hammering home the whole time about how one of this show's big faults is a too literal adherence to the manga, such that it makes for awkward translations to animation, or usually outright fails to take advantage of the strengths of the new medium, which has the effect of just making everything worse. Well, there is one specific aspect in which this show does in fact deviate quite substantially from the manga, and oh boy, it is bad. So, to set the groundwork for this, let's zoom out and establish the structure of the anime as a whole. The first 6 episodes adapt the first 3 volumes of the manga, with a little of volume 4 sprinkled in at the end there, equating to more or less half a volume per episode. This gives each individual story beat time to breathe and play out, leaving almost nothing on the cutting room floor. So far, so good. For the first half of the show, if nothing else, the pacing is at least solid. Well, to be clear, the end of episode 6 is a little weird, with it cramming in more material than usual and skimming past some of it. This has the effect of the episode just continuing past its natural climax, which feels weird in terms of pacing, and the condensed material that follows also feels rushed, but whatever. As long as the show more or less maintains the pace it established in the first half, at least the story will have a chance to play out at a natural pace. So with that said, let's see how the back half of the show approaches the material. Episode 7 adapts the end of Chapter 17, all of Chapter 18, and skips 19 before ending with 20, rounding out Volume 4. Episode 8 adapts 21 through most of 25, skipping some crucial character building scenes so that we have the bulk of Volume 5 in one episode. Episode 9 picks up with the last bit of 25 and all of 26 to round out Volume 5, then adapts 27 through the first bit of 30, covering half of Volume 6, with just a whole bunch of scenes from across those chapters left on the cutting room floor. And then Episode 10 completely skips the back half of Volume 6 and the front half of Volume 7, picking up in the middle of Chapter 33 before ending with 36 from the start of Volume 8. Episode 11 zooms through the rest of Volume 8, ending with the end of Chapter 40, and Episode 12 concludes by speeding through all of Volume 9, ending with a truncated version of the bonus chapter that closes that volume. In other words, the front half of the show more or less faithfully adapts the first 3 volumes, the back half omits an incredible amount of material to speed through double the volumes in the same time frame, and oh my god, does it show. So, there is a whole lot to unpack here. To try to keep things organized, let's break down the cuts the show made into 2 broad categories. Minor cuts, that is 1 or 2 smaller medium scenes skipped past here or there, mostly for pacing, and major cuts. That is, whole chapters entirely glossed over for the sake of God, I don't even know, man. Both varieties of cuts have their own similar deleterious effects on the show. Let's take them one at a time. First, minor cuts. Every once in a while, the show will skip past a minor scene that's, say, just a quick bit of dialogue to drop some exposition or establish what's happening, and they truncate and offload that exposition onto another character in a later scene with the aim of tightening up the pacing. On occasion, this is fine. For instance, Episode 4 omits the scene that opens Chapter 9 where Himari and Yuri are having lunch and engaging in some light, cute flirting. Functionally, this scene just serves to establish that Yuri's about to have her first in-studio practice session with Aki's band. The anime decides to skip right to that session. In this particular instance, I understand why the scene was cut. The scene was cute, but it didn't serve any vital narrative function that couldn't also be communicated by just showing what happens next. When you've only got so much time in an episode and you have to cover X amount of pages, this is the sort of thing that has to go. So for the sake of pacing, I'm perfectly fine with little scenes like that getting left behind. What's less forgivable is when they start cutting scenes that, on the surface, don't seem to serve any vital function, just like that lunch scene, but actually do have some crucial character building information. Like when Episode 6 comes to a natural conclusion, only to for some reason keep going with a truncated version of the next chapter, which is, crucially, Himari and Yuri's first real time spent together as girlfriends, such that the development of their relationship starts to feel minimized. Put a pin in that. More prominently, how about just all the Shiho stuff in Episode 8? God, there's just so much here. Or rather, there's so much not here, it's hard to pick, so let me just... Okay. I've got 2 examples in mind. So what I'm going to do now is describe in as factual a manner as I can 2 scenes, one short, one a bit longer, from Volume 5. Then I'll discuss their significance to the wider narrative, which should lead to an understanding of why cutting them is detrimental to the overall story. The first scene I want to mention is really just 1 page from Chapter 22. For context, the bands have all auditioned to partake in the upcoming school festival. The results have just been posted, and Aki's on her way to check to see whether they got in. But when she arrives, she sees that Shiho got there first, and watches as Shiho takes in the results. First, she clasps her hands together, eyes shut, mouth warbling, reflecting anxiety and worry. Then she opens her eyes, hopeful but still nervous. Finally, she closes her eyes, leans forward, and breathes out in relief. A whole emotional journey in 3 panels, and without a word, you know her band passed. Next, we're gonna skip ahead a little past the scene where Aki confronts Shiho, which I've already highlighted a couple of times, to the start of Chapter 23. Himari, Momoka, and Shiho have all met up at Cooking Club, and Himari is congratulating the 2 for having passed the audition. Himari's excited, Momoka's pleased, but thanks to the confrontation with Aki just before it, Shiho's all like, okay, I'm sorry, I said I wouldn't editorialize, but just look at this. One of the funniest illustrations of the whole manga. Have I told you how much I love Shiho? Anyway, she's all upset about Aki. Not speaking names, because at this point she doesn't know Himari all that well and isn't dragging her into her business. Shiho talks about how she used to be in Aki's band and now she's agreed to a showdown with them. Shiho speaks resentfully of Aki and Yuri, but because she's not naming names, Himari's super empathetic and supportive of her, and hearing all of that puts a genuine, warm smile on Shiho's face. Himari says her goodbyes, and Shiho and Momoka engage in some banter before hinting at the tragedy that holds them together. So, what's the significance of these scenes? Well, it's important to note that up until this point, we've primarily only gotten to know Shiho as Aki sees her. In every interaction with Aki and her cohort, and there's been a number of them, Shiho has come off as abrasive, superior, condescending, full of herself, all of that jazz. In other words, she's primarily characterized as an overly confident rival to serve as an obstacle for our protagonists. We've had exactly 1 scene where she met Himari to serve as a contrast, a scene that starts to show a different side of her, but that scene is heavily outweighed by all the others. So the significance of these scenes is that they really help to illustrate in full all the little facets that make up Shiho Izumi. Look at Shiho when she thinks she's alone, showing faces she would never show to anyone else. Look at her nervousness and relief, showing that behind all that bluster, she still worries about whether she and her band are good enough, still takes some small, easy joy in having her worries assuaged. And then God, that whole scene with Himari, look at how she's acting almost like an entirely different person when she's around people she trusts and cares about. By her standards, she's outright relaxed with them, venting with ease about her worries, engaging in banter, even smiling and taking comfort in her friend's support. All of this illustrates a completely different side to Shiho, one that's still loud and expressive, yes, but not in service of spite or ego, rather motivated by past hurts and a desire to make proud those who care about her. In other words, it's little scenes like these that are essential to fleshing out Shiho, to providing her with 3-dimensional characterization. It's scenes like these that give us reason to care about her. Imagine, then, the effect on the story when most, if not all of those scenes are just gone. Suddenly, Shiho isn't the nuanced, 3-dimensional character who shows different faces to different people, whose different sides we get to explore depending on who she's with. Instead, she's mostly who her first appearances make her out to be, a prideful, arrogant rival, and that alone is shallow. That alone lacks the heart, which made her such a compelling character. And so, as the narrative progresses, barreling through scenes that strictly advance the plot and nothing more, every time we do get more information about Shiho, those scenes ring hollow because the show forgot to make us care in the first place. During a flashback in Volume 8, when Shiho experiences incredible heartbreak and runs away crying, I cried. And god damn it, every time I look at this 2-page spread of Shiho bawling her eyes out, I still tear up because the manga had done the legwork to make me care about her. When the same scene came along in the anime, so much of the Shiho I knew had been lost that I found it hard to care. And that's the rub, isn't it? Ostensibly, all these little cuts were for pacing. By losing the non-essential stuff, you tighten up the narrative and can fit more of the story into a shorter time frame. But those little scenes that cut weren't superfluous, else the mangaka would not have drawn them. They all had their purpose, fleshing out the characters and adding the nuances that gave the story life. Without those little beats, everything just feels that much emptier. Shiho isn't the only one to suffer from the little cuts. Much of the supporting cast had their roles significantly reduced in these cuts. Hajime, for example, was outright removed from one of her first appearances and is such a non-presence in the anime, you'd be forgiven for forgetting she existed. But they do hurt Shiho worst of all. Which is ironic, because all the cuts, minor and major, were supposed to help the story focus in on her. So let's talk about those major cuts. The first time the anime entirely omits a chapter is in episode 7, where it cuts straight from the end of chapter 18 to the start of 20, leaving 19 stuck in manga land. The next big omissions we'll be concerned with are the bulk of chapter 30, all of 31 and 32, and the front half of 33, but we'll get to those in a minute. For now, what's the deal with 19? Well, this chapter comprises a decent chunk of volume 4 and follows Himari and Yuri as they go on their first date as an official couple. Himari's all worried about dressing up just right. Meanwhile, Yuri shows up totally casual and doesn't say anything about her clothes, which is the first event in a chain of things Himari starts privately worrying about. They go to see a Marvel movie, which Yuri is really into but makes Himari fall asleep, which is the funniest shit. They do a bunch of other things and have a good time, but little things that Yuri does and does not say start weighing on Himari until she just comes out and asks if Yuri's bored. Yuri's startled by the question because of course she isn't, so they talk things through, realize how they were misreading each other, and make up with a hug, coming out the stronger for it. So what's the significance of this chapter? Well, it's the first big development in their relationship since they started going out, and it lays the groundwork for the conflict that'll soon drive a temporary wedge between them, leading to the climax at the festival. I belabored the whole theme of honesty at the start of this video, and this chapter is the first time we see that theme in play as a core pillar of their relationship, not as a hopeful couple, but as an official one. Both of them are harboring private worries about the other, and the more they hold it in, the greater a risk they run of letting the date turn sour. It's only when they finally let all their truths out that the date is able to end on a happy note. It's also notable that Himari's the one to break their silence, to get them both spilling the beans. If it was up to Yuri, she would have let all those fears fester and gnaw at her, as indeed she will later go on to do. This chapter thus serves to foreshadow the karaoke and festival dates, where their hidden worries are taken to greater extremes, allowed to fester longer before those all-important truths are dragged into the light, thanks in large part to Himari working up the nerve to take action. In short, this chapter is the vital first step in the development of the girls' relationship from flustered newlyweds to trusting partners. And in the anime, it's straight up gone, which is weird, right? Like here we've got the manga going out of its way to lay an important thematic foundation for its characters going forward, and without that, much of the rest of what they do is going to make less sense, right? Without this setup, any subsequent actions that originally followed from this will now feel jarring, like they've come out of nowhere. You can't just remove this without also taking away a lot of the meaning inherent in the story. It's just a big old butterfly effect. One change this early on would necessitate further greater changes down the line in order to retain some semblance of cohesion. So with that in mind, how did the anime handle the chapters that directly followed, narratively and thematically, from 19? The karaoke date, the festival, their subsequent reconciliation. How did all of that play out in the show? Oh, wait a minute. Those events happened in chapters 30 through 32. The anime didn't adapt those. They skipped that stuff altogether. It's just fucking gone. Oh, no. You know how I spent an inordinate amount of time back at the start of this video 2 centuries ago analyzing the narrative and thematic significance of those chapters? Guess what, baby? That was all also set up. The payoff is right now, motherfuckers.
Surprise, motherfucker.
Because the anime cutting out those chapters in its mad dash through the later volumes was its greatest sin of all. The omission of these chapters and related events has massive reverberations throughout the show's back half, completely sucking the heart and soul out of the narrative. In the anime, thanks thanks to these cuts, Yuri becomes a static character, her and Himari's relationship becomes so minimized as to be invisible, and both of those factors combined also rob Shiho's story of its thematic significance. Let's take that last point first. Way back at the start of the video, I talked about how the narrative's two major plot threads, those being Himari and Yuri's relationship and Shiho's rivalry with Aki, are inexorably intertwined. They both inform the narrative and thematic significance of the other. Everything's about honesty. Shiho becomes a destabilizing force which threatens the honest foundation of Himari and Yuri's relationship. After working through that, Himari grows into a more confident person who is able to help Shiho become more honest herself. Shiho serves as a dark reflection for Yuri, who she could become if she lets all her secrets and worries fester, and Yuri in return represents the more confident, joyful musician Shiho could become if she lets herself be more honest. Everything has weight because of how it all connects. But what happens when you delete, half of the equation? Suddenly any and all meaning is just gone. I mean, just think about how little sense this makes. They cut so much of Himari and Yuri that, on balance, Shiho has a lot more screen time than she might otherwise. This would make you think that the goal here was to focus the narrative on her story alone. But, as we've already established, the show also made a bunch of little cuts that robbed her scenes of their emotional weight, so what you're ultimately left with is a hollow reflection of the original narrative, one that carries neither its emotional core nor its thematic cohesion. So Shiho is a wash, but let's not forget how bad a move it was to reduce the presence of Himari and Yuri. You know, the main characters of the show. They're the two we got attached to, and cutting back on their appearances until they're basically side characters in their own story does nothing but hurt the viewer's investment. Yuri's presence is reduced so much that she becomes a static character. From episodes 7 to 12, I would be hard-pressed to argue that she changes or grows in any meaningful way, which is not at all true of the equivalent events in the manga. There, thanks to her run-ins with Shiho, her relationship with Himari, and her role in Aki's band, she becomes a more honest, trusting, and trustworthy person. In other words, she's a dynamic character. She grows. By just cutting all of her most important scenes, the anime ultimately sanded off all the nuance until we were left with a static, pale imitation of her. And, returning to that pin from earlier, let's not forget Himari and Yuri's relationship. You know, the heart of the story, the driving force of the narrative, the core element that every other event in the manga spins off from. Thanks to the cuts in the anime, it more or less ceases to exist in the show's back half. With that ejection goes all of the emotional investment that the narrative had spent its front half building, so you're left with far fewer reasons to care than in the manga, where that relationship never leaves the stage, only temporarily yields the spotlight. In other words, their relationship is what we're here to see, so when it's minimized like this, so too is our investment in the show. But also, if we could just take a minute to consider the contents of these chapters, we might just stumble onto a kind of fucked up pattern here. So, going into the karaoke date, Yuri and to a lesser extent Himari have both been harboring worries along the lines of, oh no, is our relationship getting static? Do we need to take things further? What comes next? As a result, they're becoming hyper aware of each other physically. There's a moment of intense intimacy that almost leads to a kiss in the karaoke date before Yuri pulls back, leading to their actual first kiss at the festival, an emotionally intimate moment, which in turn leads to a more intense makeout session at Yuri's home, a physically intimate moment. Do you see the pattern there? Of all the things that got left on the cutting room floor, this show chose to delete almost every moment of physical and emotional intimacy between its two leads. I know I'm making a hard left turn into conspiracy theory territory here, but man, that just doesn't happen by accident. You know, that was a choice. Someone had to go through and make the active decision to not include any of that. So I have to fucking wonder, knowing that the production of this show was a shit show, but not knowing the details regarding exactly how, was there someone in a position of power with some degree of authority or creative control who was themselves homophobic? Or did they think that they could cater to a wider audience by taking out all of the most explicitly gay stuff? Either of those options would be extremely stupid. Yes, but given the final product we ended up with, I cannot help but worry at their plausibility. I know. The more likely explanation is that the implications these cuts give is just an unfortunate accident, a byproduct of the baffling creative decision to try to cram too much story into too few episodes. But look, all I'm saying is if you're making a show about girls kissing and you take out all the parts where girls kiss, you've got the wrong fucking priorities! Man, just think about what we could have had. Imagine, for a minute, if the approach to this show's visual presentation wasn't so married to the source material that it treated it like a storyboard. If instead, the adaptation took advantage of the change in medium to enhance the story, with animation that accentuated the characters' emotions and scene construction, confident enough in its visual presentation to let the music do the talking. Imagine for a minute that same rigid adherence to the source material for its visual presentation instead applied to the storytelling. If the anime had kept up the same pace for the back half of the show as the front, if instead of erasing swaths of material it had committed to showing all of it, at that pace, do you know where the anime would have ended? At the festival, with Himari and Yuri's first kiss? Imagine how perfect a finale that would be. All the drama beforehand leading to an emotionally explosive climax. All of the inner turmoil, conflict, and growth they've experienced culminating in a beautiful moment of reconciliation and reaffirmation. Ending the show there would have been perfect. Plot threads with Aki and Shiho would have been left dangling, yes, but Himari and Yuri would have gone through a complete emotional and thematic arc. I would much rather have been left with a show that feels thematically and emotionally cohesive, if narratively incomplete, than the one we got, one that technically told a complete story but was left thematically empty. Shit, that's the deal we got with Bloom Into You. This production should have taken its cues from that instead of, whatever led to this. So that's The Whisper anime, a bad adaptation of a wonderful manga. Its lackluster visual presentation and gutting of the source material leave it feeling like nothing short of a betrayal, something to be avoided at all costs. And now, at the end of all of this, what did we learn? I wish I had a more useful takeaway to present to you than show bad, but after digging into all of that, I'm just about at the end of my rope, both in terms of brainpower and voice. It's really going, I shouldn't have done this all in one session. If there's any lesson to take away from all of this, I suppose it's that a strong adaptation, first and foremost, respects its source material. That doesn't mean being literal to the page only when it suits you. It means understanding the source material not just on a narrative level, but a thematic one. You have to get to the story's beating heart, find what makes it resonate. Once you have that, from there, any changes you may or may not make become, at best, a secondary concern.
Love will abide.
Changes are a necessity when adapting from one medium to another. So what's key isn't what changes are made or how many, it's that those changes are made in service of telling the story in the best manner possible for the new medium. The changes to the Whisper Me a Love Song anime were not made in service of telling a better story. Ergo, where the manga succeeded, the anime failed. And that, as they say, is that.
I think I'm gonna
Love you for a long, long time.
Now, at the end of our long journey, I only have a few last-minute pleas to make. If you're a manga reader, I hope this analysis brought you some catharsis. If you're an anime-only viewer or otherwise have not yet experienced Whisper yourself, please, I beg you, go read the manga. You'll have a much better time with it than with the anime. Finally, regardless of your investment in the subject you've spent the last however long it's been listening to me ramble on about, thank you for sticking with me to the end. I'll catch you in the next one.